Kevin McCarthy and some House Republicans are floating a new and interesting idea. And this is an idea that should not be considered seriously as a proposal that is going to go through and become law. Why? Because, as we've talked about in the podcast before, the Republicans control narrowly one house of Congress. And in order for a bill is a proposed law, to become a law, it has to go through the House, it has to go through the Senate, where it has to also survive the filibuster. It has to pass both houses of Congress and then be signed by the president. Now, normally there's one more step that should be added. It has to be upheld as constitutional by the Supreme Court, because these days all important legislation is challenged on the grounds of its constitutionality. So what is Kevin McCarthy's proposal good for? What's its point? Well, I think its point is to put something on the agenda, to make it part of the Republican framework, the Republican vision for how to fix America, and ultimately the Republican platform in 2024. So this is an idea that is worth considering. It's called a fair tax, and it would abolish the current tax system. Basically, no more income tax. It would abolish, in effect, the IRS. Why? Because the IRS is needed to administer this rather complex system of taxation we have now. So it would get rid of that. And it would impose an across-the-board sales tax. So what's a sales tax? Well, a sales tax is sometimes also known as a consumption tax. When you buy stuff, you would pay a tax that would be added on to the price of the product. Now, think of the difference between an income tax and a sales tax. An income tax kicks in when you earn the money. So you make $100 and the government will take 10 or 20 or the highest marginal tax rate, about 38%. So at the highest level, the government is taking 38 cents on the dollar and giving you basically 62 cents to keep. The thing that is being taxed is your productivity, your work. In some ways, you can see why a sales tax is more appealing in principle, because it's not taxing productivity. It's not taxing your work. It's taxing your consumption or your spending. In fact, it's providing an incentive for you not to spend the money, but to save the money. Why? Because if you save the money, you're taxed zero. You're allowed to save all the money. So let's just say, for example, you have $1 and you can either spend it or you can save it. Well, if you save it, you've saved $1. But if you spend $1, you're gonna only be able to buy a product that's worth about 70 cents. Why? Because there'll be a 30% sales tax on top of that. In fact, that would be the only main tax of the government would be levying in a replacement for the income tax. So on everything you buy, you'd have to sort of add a 30% price tag. Now, this is a big price tag, and obviously people would feel it because, hey, you buy a car for $30,000, you add 30% of that, that's almost $10,000 added to the price. You go buy milk and it's what, $2.50? You got to add 30% to that, so it's going to be about $3.25. So this is not to say that people wouldn't feel it, but guess what? You get to save all that money on the income side. And so, for example, you kind of have a choice here. Let's just say you make $100,000. Right now, out of the $100,000, you probably get to keep around 82 or 83. I'm guessing that on average, you'll pay about a 17 to 20% income tax. On the other hand, you can keep the full 100 and pay a 30% sales tax. Now, very interestingly, we have two extremes here. The progressive income tax, which is what we have now, is a tax that penalizes the wealthy because the wealthy pay more. I personally would favor a flat tax of somewhere in the range of 12 to 15%. Again, this would also get rid of the IRS, by the way. Why? Because you'd have a simple postcard. This is how much money you made. Calculate 15%, send it in. End of story. You would simply need a very minimal administration for that. But that's progressive. Now, sales taxes tend to be regressive. They tend to fall a little heavier on the poor and the middle class. Why? Because the poor and the middle class spend a higher percentage of their income on consumption. So I'm not trying to sort of adjudicate Kevin McCarthy's proposal. I'm not saying at this point whether I'm for or against it. I've just tried in this segment to explain it a little bit to show what it would do. And you can sort of run the math in your own head and ask yourself, at this point, don't worry about whether the tax is good for the country or not. You can just sort of run a little bit of math and ask the question, would this sort of a shift, a move from an income tax to a sales tax, be good for me?